might I ask you to take your seats, please? Could you kindly take your seats so we can start the proceedings? Assalamu alaikum, masal khair, dobry dien, welcome, good afternoon. My name is Cornelia Meyer, and I will be guiding you through today's proceedings and also have the honor to moderate the panel. First of all, welcome to the role of ICIEC to attract private-public partnership investments in the post-COVID era, which is very important. It's important we have resource mobilization, we invest in infrastructure, and this panel is all about that. First, let us have a short testimonial video of the valued partners of ICIEC.
The Islamic Corporation for the Insurance of Investment and Export Credit, ICIEC, is a specialized multilateral insurer. We facilitate trade and investments between member countries and the world by providing Sharia-compliant risk mitigation and credit enhancement tools. We are catalyzing sustainable economic development in our member countries and in strategic sectors. ICIEC is rated AA3 by Moody's with a stable outlook for 14 consecutive years. Since its inception, ICIEC has insured more than $80 billion of trade and investment. In the face of the global pandemic, ICIEC responded quickly to help its member countries. Forging strategic partnerships, ensuring critical trade flows continued, and delivering innovative solutions to help mitigate the fallout from the pandemic. Our Strategic Preparedness and Response Program, SPRP, provided $643 million of business insurance coverage to protect essential trade flows. We provided $2 billion to support the private sector and to attract cross-border investments with the launch of the COVID-19 Guarantee Facility, CGF. We're also strengthening the pandemic recovery efforts of member countries, providing $262 million to the healthcare sector and $50 million to small to medium enterprises. For example, the ICIEC COVID-19 Emergency Response Initiative, ICIEC, delivered $400 million in grant funding to preserve the flow of essential imports to low-income member countries. But that's not all. ICIEC also delivered business continuity management measures and a defensive investment strategy. We contributed to knowledge-sharing webinars, and we forged 5 new partnerships with the leading ICIECs. Here are just some of the many projects we've recently supported in the OIC. capacity of Côte d'Ivoire's health infrastructure, we've contributed to the Republic's National Development Plan. With the construction of a 50,000-seat Olympic football stadium and training grounds in Senegal and a solar energy system to power it all, we helped progress the region's goal of becoming an emerging market economy by 2035. By extending and strengthening 4G across Indonesia, we supported Indonesia's shift to a more digital economy with the expansion of the Alexandria port in Egypt. We increased the competitiveness of the Egyptian maritime transport strategy. And thanks to our help with the construction and rehabilitation of schools in Côte d'Ivoire, we are providing access to quality education, reducing illiteracy, mitigating poverty, and providing an alternative option to criminal and terrorist activities. ICIEC, Partnerships for Development.
It is a great pleasure to share our experiences as a global leader in telecommunications and information technology. CP provides innovative technologies and integrated solutions for global operators, enterprise, and consumers from more than 160 countries, including ICIEC member countries. Critical risk and credit insurance provided by ICIEC is a powerful tool for us to control the risk and support the operation. We look forward to closer collaborations with ICIEC and better serving our clients. Thank you.
We have been working with a number of operators such as Uzbek Telecom for which the ICIEC assurance has been very helpful in helping to mobilize financing from banks, in this case DBS.
Yes, because Power, as we are aware, we have business over 100 countries, and definitely member countries of ICIEC as well as mentioned, we have a business in Uzbek Telecom, which is supported by ICIEC.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank ICIEC and Islamic Development Bank for inviting us to contribute to this. We started the dialogue with ICIEC 3 years ago, and I'm very proud to announce that we have been signing the first transaction, and especially important for us that this transaction is to be successful. ICIEC plays a crucial role in supporting business in member countries, and its role is very complementary to other ECs and international model. I'm sure that the cooperation with ICIEC will help to further develop businesses in these countries and will transform into long-lasting and very fruitful partnership. Thank you very much.
The world economy has become increasingly interconnected over the last few decades, particularly in trade and investment. With the growth of global value chains, advanced economies increasingly specialize in specific activities and stages rather than others. Trade and investment involve extensive flows of intermediate goods and services, and lowering investment barriers is more than ever needed for the country to become integrated. However, companies looking to trade and invest globally still face many political and commercial risks, limiting their desire or ability to conduct business in foreign markets. And the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic have aggravated these risks. But while the uncertain times we face posing trials for us all, ICIEC persists in finding ways to support our member countries, clients, and partners throughout recovery. We will continue to develop risk mitigation solutions and enhance our financial flexibility tools to provide resources to help rebuild economies while delivering sustainable development impact for the people who need it most. And in so doing, safeguarding the continued flow of international trade and investment between our member countries and the world.
That was a terrific endorsement. and wonderful to hear how valued ICIEC is across the globe in ICIEC member countries. So now it is, without further ado, a great honor and a great pleasure to hand over the mic to His Excellency Mr. Usama Kaisi, who is the CEO of ICIEC, who will be giving you opening remarks and a welcome address. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم النبيين والمرسلين سيدنا محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this high-level panel discussion on the role of ICIEC to attract PPP investments in the post-COVID-19 era. One of the many side events organized leading up to tomorrow's inauguration of the 46th annual meetings of the ISDB group in this historic and beautiful city of Tashkent. I am grateful to the government and the people of Uzbekistan and our partners for their generous hospitality and their invaluable support in hosting this important event. Since my first visit in 2018, and I have grown fond of this non Shakhre, city of bread and hospitality, Tashkent, with its history going back over 2 millennia. Neither conquests nor the devastating earthquake of 1966 could undermine the Uzbek people's resolve to build back better. The latest manifestation in the country's encouraging economic recovery in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the modernization of Tashkent city, the pandemic hit Uzbekistan as well very hard initially. Due to the strong government response, the economy rebounded in the second half of 2020, recording a 1.7% GDP growth, one of the few positive rates in the world in 2020. A growing private sector, we all agree, is essential for the future economic growth, and formal job creation across countries at all levels of development. Not surprisingly, the PPP sector is considered a modern way of facilitating the provision of the private sector to help meet the increasing demand, especially for public infrastructure. Investment in infrastructure can be a driving force for the economic recovery for the COVID-19 pandemic, for economic transformation, job creation, and inclusive growth. After all, the pandemic also exposed the insufficient infrastructure in many sectors. According to the World Bank, private sector investment dropped by an unprecedented 56% in the first half of 2020 compared with the same period in 2019. And like many other sectors, infrastructure was brought to near standstill by COVID-19 pandemic. However, the private sector's retreat jeopardizes recovery and the ability to build back better once the pandemic is under control. This should be of concern to all of us and to the private sector in specific, which has been looking for ways to find better yields in a low-rate environment. If one considers the current pipeline of global projects estimated at $12 trillion by Fitch Rating, With the rail and renewables to top the investment sectors, the business case for private sector involvement is well proven. Of this, close to $8 trillion is required by the IDB, ICIEC member countries. In Asia, close to $5 trillion. In the MENA region, close to $1.6 trillion. And in Africa, close to $1 trillion. A traditional barrier to private investment was the exposure to a broad range of risks. ICIEC has risen to the challenge by responding swiftly to the pandemic, by forging strategic partnerships, ensuring the continuance of critical trade flows, and creating innovative de-risking tools and solutions to help mitigate fallout in member countries. Political risk insurance and credit enhancement have a track record of effectively de-risking and thus catalyzing private investment into emerging markets through capital-efficient instruments. In 2019, for instance, ICIEC, African Development Bank, African Trade Insurance Agency, and Guaranco launched the groundbreaking co-guarantee platform for Africa, aimed at increasing the volume of insurance and guarantees available to project sponsors and their bankers in a market-responsible manner. The objective was and is to mobilize greater amounts of investment than would otherwise take place in the region in the absence of affordable risk mitigation products. ICIEC contributed $643 million in insurance coverage toward the implementation of the ISDB Group $2.3 billion COVID mitigation strategic preparedness and response program, guided by the 3 Rs, the respond, restore, restart culture. ICIEC as well has jointly launched with the ISDB a $2 billion COVID-19 guarantee facility, which is specifically aimed at supporting the private sector, in particular COVID-hit industries in member countries, and to attract cross-border investments. Cumulatively, over the last 27 years, we have insured more than $80 billion in trade and investments, with the latter accounting to 20% in various ICIEC member countries. We remain confident that we can deliver continued support to our member countries through innovative risk management solutions to help them navigate the ongoing health, economic, and social impacts of the pandemic. We are encouraged by the government of Uzbekistan's stated intention to use PPPs to channel increasing levels of private investments towards infrastructure, projects in renewable energy, services, agriculture, transport, healthcare, education, and tourism. Even the vital mining sector are open to minority private investment subject to central bank approval. Our esteemed panelists will inform us about the Uzbek government's privatization and PPP plans ahead. The business case for investments in Uzbekistan is implicit. A 34.6 million population, a young demography, an advanced downstream agribusiness and horticulture opportunities, and a reform agenda that acknowledges the challenges ahead. Finally, I would like to reiterate that we at ICIEC are keen to leverage our unique position as the leading Sharia-compliant ECA in the world and its prominent partnerships with other multilateral development institutions and ECAs to provide the credit and investment de-risking solutions to effect development impact through improving the lives of citizens in our member countries, to promote inclusiveness and connectivity among them, and to improve access to Islamic finance. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your wide-ranging remarks, which set the stage wonderfully and gave us great context. Now, it is a distinct honor and a great pleasure to welcome to the stage the alternate IDB governor for Uzbekistan and Deputy Minister of Investment and Foreign Trade, His Excellency Mr. Shuhrat Vafayev, to give his keynote address. Your Excellency, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me first of all welcome you to Tashkent, welcome you in Uzbekistan, and I hope that you feel here comfortable, home, and if there is anything we can do to ensure that you enjoy your stay in our capital, just let us know, we'll be in your disposal. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank the ICIEC team for the organization of this discussion of this platform, which can help us to establish connections, links, and relations between different businesses and organizations. Uzbekistan, a few years ago, to be precise, 5 years ago, under the leadership of President of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Shavkat Mirziyoyev, launched very ambitious and large-scale reforms. And being in the civil service for 30 years, even I was sometimes skeptical about how realistic these objectives and are they doable. In fact, the life has turned the way that we've done probably a bit even more than we expected to manage at the beginning. And the results, the first results are clearly evidenced that we're on the right path. Our GDP, as it was already mentioned, stayed positive, even in GDP growth stayed positive, even difficult 2020, despite all impact of pandemic, and the well-being of the population, which is most important for us, is improved. In terms of business climate reforms, in terms of improving environment for the private sector, our steps in easing regulations, in eliminating the red tape and barriers for the private sector reflected in, first of all, in the World Bank's Doing Business report, where we changed and gone 69, I think, points in just last couple of years. The country first time received its sovereign rating, and it is encouraging that our ratings are stable now and we don't have any negative outlooks provided by rating companies. In addition, one of the main drivers of growth in Uzbekistan was, of course, acceleration of infrastructure development through deploying private sector participation. Very bold determination and decisiveness of President Mirziyoyev's agenda enabled us to approve and implement a pretty ambitious public-private partnership program that included, first of all, the enactment of new PPP law, and the government was so attentive to this issue and to the law that as soon as we realized that we still need to change it a bit to make conditions for private sector even more attractive, we convinced the parliament and amended this law in a short period since it was adopted. And I believe by now we have pretty attractive and up to the international standards legal framework in this particular area. The first transactions which were implemented under the PPP program are power sector projects. Just in 2 years, just 2 years ago, we had launched our first international public tenders to select private investors for solar PV parks, wind farms, and conventional power plants in different regions of Uzbekistan. The number of submitted applications pleasantly surprised us, first of all, and of course demonstrated a very high interest of foreign investors to develop power projects in Uzbekistan. More than 80 leading companies, international companies, have expressed their interest to participate in tender. The success of the PPP program is clearly demonstrated by commissioning this year of 2 solar PV parks, each 100 megawatt capacity, developed by the UAE company Masdar and French company Total. In addition, 1.5 gigawatt of wind generation capacities are expected to be commissioned in 2023 by companies like Masdar and Aqua Power from Saudi Arabia. And moreover, recently with advisory support of our development colleagues from IFC and ADB, we have completed international PPP tenders to develop another 3 solar PV parks in Uzbekistan. And first experience was very interesting. I was first time participating in the ceremony of opening the bids with tariffs proposed for solar plant by our bidders, and we were so anxious about ensuring transparency, so we invited the TV people, and they basically they basically were it was happening basically online, and we were very pleased by the results of these auctions, which enabled us to receive one of the lowest, I think, in the top 10 lowest tariffs for solar plants in Uzbekistan. And we continue, and we're determined to continue this transparent, competitive selection of investors in our generation capacities. Another interesting area, of course, transport sector, and we are very keen to bring private investments, private players in road infrastructure, construction and maintenance, especially given that Uzbekistan is a double landlocked country and depends a lot on a road network and its quality. With support of, again, of our international development partners, we are now structuring 2 projects in road sector. One is Tashkent-Andijan, from Tashkent to Andijan, Fergana Valley, and another one is Tashkent-Samarkand toll road. Both of these roads are in a range of 300 to 350 kilometers, and we hope that road sector PPPs will be another area of success of this type of investment attraction by Uzbekistan. Healthcare, in healthcare sector we struggled a lot, but finally, and mainly because of changes, adoption of the new law and amendments to it, we closed the first deal, which is about providing hemodialysis services for patients in several regions of Uzbekistan. And an Indian company, Nipropolis, was selected as a service provider and equipment supplier for this particular project. But Coming back to the role of our institutions, coming back to the role of ICIEC, I believe that all these deals are, first of all, possible because of strong support from international development partners, including the Islamic Development Bank. And PPP, of course, is not panacea. It's not the only tool and instrument for attracting investments and investors. It is one of them. And along with that tool, we apply another instruments like privatization, greenfield investments, or project financing, or private equity, and there are many, many other options. What is most important for countries like Uzbekistan is ability to use different options, have access to different and diversified menu of instruments which help investors de-risk their investments and support the governments in terms of providing additional credit enhancement support. And institutions like ICIEC can play a very critical role with relatively small investments compared to the size of the projects in bringing private sector in, bringing them with confidence and with trust in what they're doing in Uzbekistan and in many, many other developing countries like Uzbekistan. So I believe that together we can work on increasing, first of all, and raising operations of the corporation here in Uzbekistan, as well as in other countries of our region and our Ummah. Thank you for this opportunity to share my views, and I look forward to a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
His Excellency is already taking his seat because I'm now going to be, first of all, thank you for an excellent keynote. We've learned a lot, and it's good to see how Uzbekistan is trying to mobilize capital with PPP structures. So now I would like to introduce, I'm the moderator of the panel as well, so now I would like to introduce the panelists one by one. First, we have His Excellency Mr. Shuhrat Vafayev, the Deputy Minister of Investments and Foreign Trade of Uzbekistan, and also Uzbekistan's alternate governor on the Board of Governors of the Islamic Development Bank. Then we have His Excellency Mr. Usama Kaisi, who is the CEO of ICIEC. And may I ask you to join the two excellencies to join me on the stage, please. Thank you. Next, we are incredibly honored to have a representative from the Asian Development Bank amongst us, and at such a high level nonetheless, Mr. Vice President Ashok Lavasa. He's the Vice President for Private Sector Operations and Public-Private Partnerships. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Vice President. Then we have, next we have, the private sector is following. We have Mr. Tom Terling, who is the Executive Vice President of Aqua Power, which is a very up-and-coming, active developer in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and way, way beyond. And then we have Mr. Ali Badu Alsert, who is Executive Director of Yıldızlar Group in Turkey, who is in construction and also very well versed in PPP. And last, but not at all at least, one of ourselves, Mr. Ibrahim Shukri, who is the manager of the regional hub for the Islamic Development Bank in Kazakhstan. Mr. Is he joining us? Oh, he's already there. Oh, well, you're faster than me. And lastly, I'm Cornelia Meyer, and I'm the moderator. Welcome, gentlemen. It's a great honor to welcome you all here. The aim of this panel is to highlight the importance of private-public partnerships in attracting investments and mobilizing resources in the post-COVID-19 era. The pandemic has laid bare problems and vulnerabilities in cross-border trade and investment and remarkably driven up the cost of doing business. The importance of strong PPP frameworks and investments has become ever more important. As a unique multilateral platform for Sharia-compliant export, credit and investment insurance, the Islamic Corporation for the Insurance of Investment and Export Credit, ICIEC, has a big role to play in resource mobilization and ensuring constructive cooperation between the public and the private sectors in the member countries of the Organization of Islamic Countries and OIC member countries. The panel will highlight the importance of PPP structures in OIC member countries to respond to the pandemic-induced economic devastation, as well as restarting and restoring economic activity in line with the Islamic Development Bank's Strategic Preparedness and Response Program, which was launched in early 2020 as the pandemic hit the world. Allow me first to make just a few housekeeping remarks. We will first have a panel discussion where I have the honor of asking all these gentlemen interesting questions. And then the answer to every question will be limited to 3 minutes, please, because it would be a pity for the audience not to benefit from the repository of knowledge on the stage. It's very rare that you get such a distinguished group of people who know so much about PPP investments, especially also Sharia compliant and insurance structures. And then we have a Q&A session, and after that I will take a minute or two to sum up and tell you the 4 key points that I've heard, so you have something to go away with. So, without further ado, Your Excellency, Mr. Vafayev, how has the pandemic influenced your approach to PPP structures, particularly in the healthcare sector, but you also, you're also looking at roads and so on. Has there been a market change in your attitude towards PPP structures?
Thank you for the interesting question. Of course, pandemic affected all of our countries. It affected all sectors, but in terms of pushing forward the PPP agenda, we didn't stop because the challenges brought about by the pandemic made even more important reliable roads for transportation, especially quality healthcare, and of course, given Uzbekistan's growing population, a lot of infrastructure needs, it is difficult to expect that the government will be able to finance all necessary and needed investments in infrastructure, both social and hard infrastructure, on its own. And we continued welcoming the private sector in infrastructure investments. And as I already said, during that period, over the last 12 months, we closed a number of remarkable and visible deals, and we are determined to continue and first of all, to alleviate all hardships brought about by the pandemic for our people.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And it's very good to see you're unstoppable when it comes to PPP. How important are these multilateral insurance schemes, especially ICIEC, because it's the only one that's Sharia compliant, in terms of resource mobilization for PPP cooperation for the country of Uzbekistan?
Well, for the country like Uzbekistan, I think the issue of access to finance, especially to finance investments is definitely very important. And it is not surprising that as any developing and emerging economy, we have always special needs for higher volumes of long money and, of course, lower cost or cheaper money for infrastructure investments, which are low marginal very often. And against that, of course, the instruments provided by ICIEC and similar institutions like MIGA are critical for raising financing in order to modernize and expand infrastructure. What makes ICIEC and Uzbekistan cooperation extremely interesting and additional factor is that our country is predominantly Muslim country, and especially private sector representatives are seeking now very actively opportunities to use Sharia compliant financing for their projects, which is ICIEC able to provide. So against that, I believe there is a great potential for increase of cooperation between Uzbekistan and ICIEC and other Islamic bank organizations. And we are working now very actively on providing and creating all necessary regulations, legal framework to enable both financial institutions, insurance companies, including international ones, and our private sector to tap on opportunities which provided by Sharia compliant financing.
Thank you very much. So it's about lowering cost, extending tenor, and it's good to have the USP of ICIEC, which is to be Sharia compliant. So next we are with His Excellency Mr. Usama Kaisi, who is our host today. We wouldn't be here without you, so it's good. Thank you for inviting us all. The pandemic has made cross-border trade and investments much more difficult and more expensive. How can ICIEC help resource mobilization by reducing the cost of doing business? What have you specifically done, sir?
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Let me address this question from three angles. The first angle is the role of the PPPs and into the developmental impact as a tool, financing tool. The second part that I will address as an angle is the de-risking tools that are available. And the third part of it, us as ICIEC, what have we done in that aspect? We have to all agree, and Mr. Minister, he mentioned it, that it is one of the financing tools as PPP. Yeah. And it is not a tool that is viable for every solutions that we have for developmental impact, but it is one of the tools that is more and more becoming more prominent on the scene, and we are seeing it more and more in economies that are emerging, that they are using it over there. So the role that it plays in resource mobilization is extremely viable, and it is attractive to the international market. Granted that we have the proper grounds for legislation and rules that are binding and governing the PPP operations within the sovereign or within specific jurisdictions. We have talked earlier about the dwindling numbers of the investment inflows into the world globally. And still, while the numbers are going down as reported by the World Bank, it's 56% the levels of the 2019 levels in 2020. Still, the majority of these funds are still going to the developed economies and not to the countries where they need it the most. So this is something that we have to always, as an institution, look at the member countries' needs and to see how we can attract foreign direct investments to get in. There are private sectors that are very well entrenched within the PPP, and specifically on the infrastructure side. but we would like to see more on the, for the PPPs to enter into the healthcare sector, into the agricultural sector, and this is what Uzbekistan is trying to do, is to incorporate a wider range of industries to be supported by the PPP financing as an option. I have mentioned earlier that the business case for involving the private sector through the PPP in the infrastructure development is a very viable solution and has been tested and known. And specifically, we need this type of investment coming to us through the infrastructure and through the PPPs and the investment side to help come out of the COVID-19 pandemic impact for member countries. So it is very much needed in that aspect. And this will help, for us in economic reforms, job creations, and so on and so forth. The de-risking tools that we have, they are extremely powerful and they are known to everybody, which is on the risk for the political risk insurance and the credit enhancements. And the track records that are mentioned are used by the multilateral institutions are known. We have the non-honoring of financial obligations by countries. That is the most common form of insurance that we are using. And most of them, they catalyze the private investments into the emerging markets through capital efficient instruments. We'll jump after that into thirdly, what ICIEC has been done. And I do believe as ICIEC we have an impressive record in that aspect. We have had great successes in the last 3 years where we have enhanced our presence in Turkey, in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire using these aspects of the products that we have. And we are very much aware of the need and we are ready to support.
Thank you very much. So, it's interesting that you would like the importance you give to PPP structures and how you also would like them to see them in other sectors such as healthcare. I think that was, for me, a key takeaway here. But I have another question for you. I'm always very curious. When you look at, you have a wide range of ICIEC member countries. When you look at the range of ICIEC member countries, how important are the frameworks, and how do you look at the CIS states? Because that's where we are. We are in one of the key CIS countries.
CIS countries, or Central Area in general, are a very important region for the group as a whole and for ICIEC specifically. And we are aiming to enhance our presence here. And us holding our 46 annual meetings for the group is a testament to the partnership that we have with the government of Uzbekistan and our commitment to this market, and to use this platform here to springboard across the region that are over there. Our relationship in Uzbekistan and in the region are deep and they are historic. We have relationships, and we always enter the markets through the national ECAs. We have relationships with the Uzbek Invest. We have relationships in the region as well with Kaz Export in Kazakhstan. And also we have a very important relationship on the ground that is with the Uzbekistan Investment Promotion Agency, where we support the export development for inward FDI with the Uzbek Invest. We also, very important to mention here, it is not restricted just for us to provide our de-risking solutions, but at the same time we provide the technical assistance, the training, the capacity building that is a part and parcel of the mandate that we have as a group, as an institution. And always we would like to think of the local ECAs as our partners. Since 2003, we've had a long history, specifically with Kazakhstan, because it is the oldest member of ICIEC since 2003. And we have had a great experience there between trade and investment. We have covered close to $2 billion. And this is all in the infrastructure projects and into exports of strategic goods. We are looking to enhance our position within the CIS. At the level of the Uzbekistan, it's an emerging relationship that we have just started in 2019, and we look at them as a major partner, and we look more and more to do with the government of Uzbekistan. There is a huge potential of cooperation that we are looking and we are discussing during our visits here. And we look to partner with the Uzbek agencies to do more on the ground. I would like just to say that just about a case that we have done here in Uzbekistan, and this is during the very short tenure and including the pandemic period. We have fared well, but we have to do more in Uzbekistan, where we have supported projects in the tune of about $126 million. They're covering different sectors of the economy and industries, telecom, manufacturing, and here I stress on SMEs that are extremely important to support during this period. We are encouraged when we sit with the government of Uzbekistan about their stance for the reform, and this is what gives us more chances of success because of the commitment that we are seeing at the level of the government. So thank you.
As they say, nothing succeeds like success. And having actual projects on the ground is the best testimony. And it's good to see how, how important Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, but also the other CIS states are to the Islamic Development Bank. We're going east now. We're going from Jeddah to Manila. We're going to the Asian Development Bank. Mr. Vice President Lavazza, could you tell us how would you evaluate the importance of PPP partnerships as countries aim to restart their economies? It was clear it was important before, but now, after the economic devastation and to the point of His Excellency Mr. Kaisi, developing countries are growing slower, world at 6%, member countries of IDB across the board about 4.4% in 2021. So how would you look, in that context, how would you look at PPP relationships?
Thank you very much for that question. And I think the subject that we are discussing today, it assumes greater importance because we are discussing it in the shadow of the pandemic and the recovery that we are all trying to work for. So if you look at the region, that is a specific question that you asked, it would be seen that almost all the countries are gaining some space, covering some ground in the PPP space. So if you look at Kazakhstan, for example, they're already looking at the second round of renewable energy PPP project, and it is hoped that the second round will be based on competitive bidding, because competition is something which is at the heart of the public-private partnership. Similarly, if you look at other countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, all of them in the renewable energy space or in the electricity space, distribution space, they are at different stages of implementing PPP projects. I think this has become possible because of a strong commitment on the part of the ministries to usher in reforms which will attract the private sector. These are structural reforms, these are policy reforms, and they are more or less the prerequisite for public-private partnership. Mm-hmm. ADB has been very keen and proud to have supported the partner countries. And in this case, I think the example of Uzbekistan is the most prominent. The Honorable Minister did mention the tremendous progress that has been made by Uzbekistan in the PPP sphere. And if you look at what has happened in Uzbekistan, I think it's a case study because they started their reforms with the purpose of inviting private investment, including foreign investment. And one of the first steps which was taken was to have a PPP law, because a legal framework which makes the environment predictable, which creates an enabling environment for attracting private investment, I think is very necessary. Then they set up a PPP development agency, which is an agency which has the capacity to evaluate projects, to look at the pros and cons of various kinds of investment, to do the value for money analysis. So this coordinating agency, which has the capacity, which has the expertise to appraise projects, to advise policy, to advise the steps which are required for implementation, I think that was an important step. And with this, I think the Honorable Minister also mentioned that they have developed a pipeline of projects. I think that is something which is required to be done, that you don't look at just one sector, from renewable energy to health to education to wastewater management to water supply. There are many public services, many areas in which governments have dominated the investment space that are amenable to PPP. And it's a matter of great satisfaction that ADB has associated itself and supported the initiatives taken by the Uzbek government. So I think that actually can provide a template to the other countries also.
That's very interesting, and you know, you're very efficient. You've already answered my second question. So I'm taking, because my second question is my second question was, you know, how can countries create the ecosystems? You've just said basically they need to get the framework and they need to get the institutions, which Uzbekistan has done. But I'm following up, as you've answered the question already, I have another question in store for you, which is when you look across the board, you have a very wide-ranging view of countries from your previous position and the current position. When you look at it at the world, who would you say is best in class?
Well, I think, first of all, public-private partnership is desirable, but it's quite difficult to do because there are many things that you need to get right. And that is where we've been emphasizing that there are broadly 4 pillars of action. If we have to create a conducive environment for public-private partnership. Mm-hmm. Most of the sectors in which private investment is sought by way of PPP, they have been earlier dominated by governments. Okay. So in order to provide this service, what is the advantage of associating the private sector? I think the first pillar of this is that there has to be a clear legal and policy framework. That is the first pillar. The second, of course, is that even if the policy is created, then there is a lot of capacity building to be done. Mm-hmm. And successful experiments or successful cases of PPP are those where there is enough capacity both in the private sector as well as in the government and special agencies. Okay. So I think that is required. And then, of course, there is transaction advisory services, which you need to take you through the project. And finally, I think the monitoring of the project and taking care of the execution issues is equally important. And just to conclude what I am saying, PPP is quite a dynamic process. So there has to be a relationship of continuous dialogue and exchange that is required, so that the problems that you encounter in implementation or unforeseen circumstances, they can be tackled in a feasible manner. And I would say that the Asian Development Bank PPP work, it straddles all the 4 pillars.
Okay, I would paraphrase this as it takes 2 to tango. So it takes the private sector and the public sector. And with the old BT, British Telecom, some advert, it's good to talk. You need to keep the lines of communication open. So now we're going from Manila back to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to a powerhouse in every sense of the word, Aqua Power, who has started in Saudi but is, you know, very active here, is incredibly active in Africa, in the Middle East. So, you know, it's incredible to see the growth story and the success story of Aqua Power. and you are a top-notch player in the field of PPPs. Mr. Terlink, who is the Executive Vice President for Business Development, so you're going out there, making it all happen. For you, what are the key factors determining successful cooperation between the two that have to tango, the private sector and the public sector, over the lifespan of the project? Not just when you go there and develop, also when it then has to operate. And what role can multilateral insurance schemes such as ICIEC with its Sharia-compliant offering play?
All right, thank you, Cornelia, and thank you also for giving the word to the private sector in this public-private partnership discussion. Clearly, there's a large number of parameters that make a public-private partnership successful, right? And I'm going to name a couple of them. I'm not going to name 4. And actually, Mr. Lavassa already mentioned some of them, so I will be repeating some of this. But I think it's important because these are very important factors. Because these are elements which are very important in order to what I call survive the honeymoon period, right? We need to lay the foundations for the long-term partnership. This is a relationship that lasts for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, right? And the early months, probably the early years, they go very smoothly. Everybody is happy because you're signing the agreements. Everybody is happening because we see some infrastructure that is built and we see the services being provided. But problems come along, people change, ministries change, people within the private companies change as well. So it's very important to lay very robust foundations. And for robust foundations, 4 of them is, first of all, and I will get back to them in a little bit more detail within the time allocated to me, it's setting very clearly the rules of the game. Second is making sure, it's a simple one, but making sure that the infrastructure that you're going to build, the service you're going to be provide, or the product you're going to deliver is actually required, is needed in the country. Third, when you agree on a price, when you agree on a tariff, it needs to be a sustainable tariff, it needs to be an affordable tariff, coming back sustainable in the long term. And fourth, coming back also to what Mr. Lavassa said, important that there is capacity building in the country, particularly in countries where PPPs are new. Coming back to the first one, setting the rules of the game. First of all, it's the regulatory framework. We already mentioned PPP law. It doesn't have to be PPP law. It can be an investment law. It can be a set of other rules, but that at least sets the rules, set the environment on the basis of which a private investor can come into the country and build a partnership, whether that's a contractual or through a common shareholding or whatever, with the public partner. Secondly, obviously, the contractual framework, extremely important because actually that is the core of the project, and that's what needs to survive the entire 20, 25, 30 years. When I say contractual, is making clear rules about what needs to be constructed, within what time frame, what are going to be the operational parameters, what is the tariff, what is the minimum offtake. So a number of key items that need to be there. Where, when we talk about contractual framework, you don't need, the countries do not need to reinvent the boiling water, do not need to reinvent the type of contracts. Contracts with very high international standards are available, have proven successful in many parts of the world, and when we say successful, it's also bankable, because that's an extremely important point. Of course, your contractual framework needs to be balanced, right? It's as an investor, and I'm talking from the point of view as an investor, you don't step into a project where you think this is an unbalanced contract, I have so many advantages, this is a very investor-friendly contract. It's going to be a bad project, you're going to run into problems later on.
Before I go into my second question, just one sentence from you, please. How concerned are you about change in law, and can you avoid them by change in law clauses? Because, you may have, as you said, ministers change, people change, governments change, and then suddenly if people tell you, well, now it's all no longer valid. How worried are you about these things?
Yeah, change in law is obviously, it's an important point for an investor. It's an important one for lenders as well. It's always a more difficult one to negotiate with the public partners. You need some protection because you put a tariff on the table based on long-term cash flow, based on long-term forecasted revenues. So you may have some protection there. Of course, you also have to acknowledge that you live in a country that evolves, where the legal system evolves. So you have to comply with the changing legal environment, but you need some revenue protection.
So, in other words, your friendly multilaterals are important. So the second question I had for you is, you know, you're very active in Africa and CIS. You're active in a number of OIC member countries and of ICIEC member countries. Yeah. Could you tell me, you know, do you have a specific success story, a country where you think, you know, it's always good to share the success stories so everybody here can learn? Is there a country where you think, well, they got it right and we did a great project there?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are in a large. We have 65 PPPs in 13 countries today. In a lot of those countries are countries where the Islamic Development Bank is active, including. So we have successful projects, obviously in our home country, Saudi Arabia, but in the whole GIC. In the Arabic Peninsula, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Morocco, where we find projects that comply with what I just the parameters that I just mentioned, but and it's not because I'm here. I mean, we don't need to travel so far. If we want to look to a very good and a very successful example, we come to Uzbekistan. And I'm not saying it because I'm here in Uzbekistan, and I'm not saying it because I have the honor to be on the panel with His Excellency Vafayev. But it's something that I repeat when I'm in many other countries that look to the example of Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, people don't always believe me because the country is not sufficiently known yet, but we're working also from our side on this. But no, it's very clear, and it has been mentioned before, in a very short period of time, you know, in a span of a bit over, or let's say 4 years, the regulatory framework has been put in place. High-level international standard contractual arrangements are put in place. Capacity has been built. There is expertise within various ministries. And obviously there is a need for infrastructure and services going ahead. And maybe if you allow me to finish on that, what's important also is, and that's maybe because I didn't answer to the second part of your first question, is in those projects, in our projects, in the type of PPPs that we do, multilateral insurance agencies are very important, right? Okay. It's very important both for sponsors, and lenders, particularly for lenders also, in order to attract also commercial financing to these type of projects and to the countries doing the PPP.
Well, that's great. So congratulations, Your Excellency, Mr. Vafayev. You're clearly doing something right, and what I take from this is it has got to do what it says on the tin, right? If it says it's this, it's got to do it. So next we're going from Saudi and all over the OIC member countries to a very beautiful place. We're going to Istanbul. And I am very lucky to have Mr. Ali Baru Alsit, who is the Executive Director of Yıldızlar Group in Turkey. They're a very big construction group. They are very active in the PPP sector. They do turnkey projects. They do roads, they do a lot of energy. They also do turnkey hospitals, which especially in the post-COVID-19 era is an important thing. So, like Mr. Terlink, Mr. Ali, you are on the other side. We had first the multilateral side and the government side. You're on the other side. You're on the private side of PPPs. You're really at the, in a construction business, you're at the coalface, right? You're where it all happens. For you, in your business, how important are PPP structures to be able to do what you do?
Thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity of speaking to distinguished community here. Yes, I am representing Yıldızlar Group, and our group is mainly working as an EPC contractor. As worldwide active contractors, the economic growth and lack of infrastructure facilities are the two main issues that attract our interest. Considering these facts, mainly emerging countries dispersed over Middle Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe form our area of interest. Because these areas have their major infrastructure needs in sanitary, transportation, healthcare, and energy supply areas, and also they are continuing with their economic expansion even in this period of global pandemic crisis. As we discussed, I am sure everybody has the consensus that the PPP modeled contracts has many advantages for the governments and employer side to reach most economical and fluent solutions for investment. And now, as a representative of a contracting company, I would like to highlight the view from the concessionaire, the contractor side. First of all, by definition, a public-private partnership structure brings the possibility of keeping the bureaucracy and the procedures, governmental procedures, under control, introducing transparency to the market and supporting the process by entrepreneurship approach. We are, as contractors, are high risk takers, and as a Turkish contractor, we are pioneering the risk taking in many parts of the world. However, when an investment project is the subject, the finance supply agencies and other stakeholders are also in the picture, and risk taking shall be regulated to a certain level with respect to direct investments and private bodies at two ends. Of course, the minimum risk can be taken by a financier when that is a direct government investment, but this approach is already left many years ago. On the contrary, taking direct risk of a private investment is more risky and high cost for the stakeholders, for the financiers. So PPP schemes, on the other side, bring the regulated legal framework which distributes risk on all parties of the project. Furthermore, for most of the investment projects for public service, profit targets shall be regulated at a certain level for providing the service with affordable costs. PPP frameworks also introduces certain mechanisms and incentives for supporting cost limitations, which strengthens entrepreneurs to be able to keep their price levels at affordable levels for the community. As a conclusion, I can briefly state that, aside its advantages for governments and community, public-private partnership contract structure is bringing regulatory and security framework for investors, for the concessionaires, and also giving the opportunity to keep the economy with considerable profit making but affordable prices for the public.
Okay, oops, we're getting entangled here. So that's very interesting. My next question to you would be, how important, you know, when you do your business, especially internationally, how important are the multilaterals for you? You know, there's lots of insurance out there. How important are the multilaterals also as a level of comfort of direct insurance, but also as supporting? How important are they, and especially how important is ICIEC, and how does ICIEC set itself apart?
Well, considering the current pandemic conditions we are experiencing, it's a common opinion that the instability reached unpredictable high levels and radical measures are needed to be taken all around the world. Aside of the quarantine conditions we have been facing and limiting ourselves from even going out of our homes, distracted supply chains, and we faced a lot of transportation restrictions, we as construction companies are required to complete our commitments on time. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, we are already dealing with some emerging markets where infrastructural needs are at high levels and most of the time cannot be postponed anymore. Whether the borrower is the government or the private sector, the finance providers are also looking forward to time the completion of the projects. Yeah. With these facts in hand, the entrepreneurs are under high stress and will be under higher stresses due to strict time restrictions for the delayed investments and extraordinary regulations in practice. Moreover, despite the finance providers are dealing with private sector members, especially in PPP projects, hosting governments are also monitoring terms of financing provided and requiring more economical conditions, whereas the finance providers are also looking their margins in their incomes. Mm-hmm. Adding the profit margin requirements of the concessionaires, softening the finance conditions becomes the start point for finance structuring. For all those requirements, again, my opinion is that the ECAs and the multinational institutions such as ICIEC are must to be utilized. I am pleased to express that we have been working for a number of projects in cooperation with ICIEC, especially in Sub-Sahara, and we are also working for new projects in other parts of the world. At this point, I also would like to emphasize the precious supports we received and we are receiving to reach the best solution for all parties, including contractor, government, and financiers from the esteemed ICIEC team. And we are being guided by them for the right financing partners, and which their guidance strengthened us against our clients and with respect to our competitors. For example, when we as Yıldızlar Group, we are also strongly intended to expand our range of activity in the esteemed Republic of Uzbekistan, and where the position is much more improved due to strong governmental willingness to implement PPP projects, well-established legal infrastructure, and awareness of international finance and entrepreneurship requirements. This well-established, more simplified market structure, on the other hand, increases the competition and forces us to search more sophisticated finance supply structures and reach best available commercial terms. We are also thinking, we started to work with ICIEC from the very beginning, and we are also thinking that in this requirement of sophisticated financial solutions, ICIEC will be our major partner, major place for us to apply. At this point, finally, I also would like to underline our kind requirement to ask expansion of ICIEC activity range where the ICIEC member country originated entrepreneurs can utilize in unmembered hosting countries. This will be maintaining the market share expansion efforts of us and give us the strength to compete with unmember country originated competitors. So with this emphasis, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And it's very interesting. So I hear that again, Your Excellency, you've done everything right. You're getting all the praise, and I hear that Your Excellency, one wants you to do more. So that's very good. Last, we are concluding with ICIEC. We are concluding with Mr. Shokri, who is running the IDB's regional hub for CIS countries, and you have a good overview of what's happening in the region in PPP structures and how important they are. We've heard a lot about PPP structures. In your view, has the pandemic changed how this region looks at PPP? Have they become more important? What has changed with the pandemic?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and let me, many of my colleagues have covered very important points. I will start again first to reiterate the importance of PPP in the region. If you look at the infrastructure in the region, starting from energy projects, there are a lot of energy power plants that need to be renewed. It has been running for many, many years with high operating and maintenance cost and also less efficiency. Looking additionally to the connectivity, many of the region is landlocked countries, and Uzbekistan is double landlocked countries, which require railway connectivity and many big infrastructure projects. And then if you look at the health, which is very important, and worldwide in the last 10 years, the expenditure in the healthcare has been more than 60%. Now with the pandemic, increasing diseases and high cost of health, there is a huge demand for additional health capacity. All this will put a lot of pressure, and with the limitations on the budget of our member countries and with the need to bring the efficiency of the private sector, I think PPP is very, very important. We need billions of dollars in PPP. Now, looking at the challenges, colleagues briefed all the challenges. I will take it again in three groups. One is of course, regulatory framework challenges. The second one is of course, the financing capacity, bringing funding to the region. And the third one is the capacity development, which is very important for the structuring of these PPP projects. So as an IDB group, how did we react to this? We reacted in three folds. One is related to the capacity development, where we are also providing technical assistance. And we are also created a function in the bank, which is for the advisory for PPP, which can take projects from scratch until becoming it a bankable projects. The second phase related to the regulatory framework is, of course, the technical assistance. And then if you look at the financing, we have been also very active in financing PPP across the world. In the history of IDB, we have provided more than $5 billion for PPP, and we have a very successful stories in the region. And then comes the important part of the funding, where ICIEC is playing a very big role. With the capacity of ICIEC as the have a preferred creditor status, and also with its rating AA3, and it really can provide de-risking and a lot of credit enhancement to our operations. Having the capacity to provide insurance for a political risk, and also provide insurance for the unhonoring of the government sovereign commitment in terms of the contracts is very, very important. And this is how ICIEC managed to bring many international banks to finance projects across the member countries. We talked about the example in hospitals in Turkey, where some international banks came and financed up to 18 years based on the support of ICIEC. And also His Excellency the CEO talked about Cote d'Ivoire and the success of 400 beds. So looking at the future, I think with the capacity of the group, providing advisory, providing financial packages to finance PPP projects, and all covered by the insurance of ICIEC, we have an excellent package to offer to the region and to move forward, I think, hopefully in the next few years.
That's very impressive. And you know what I'm always impressed with when I look at ICIEC is where you insure the size of your portfolio and you're still investment grade rated. That is a real achievement. Now, the next question I have, can you just give us maybe one great success story in this region?
Well, there has been a lot of, projects successful in terms of PPP. We are now working on the insurance side, but in terms of projects in the PPP, there has been a number of projects, and recently we had the toll road projects in Almaty, for example, which has been ongoing according to the schedule. We have seen a number of projects in Uzbekistan previously where the PPP has successfully delivered the requirements. What are we working now is really to bring the ICIEC on board and to bring additional de-risking capacity in order to unlock additional funding for many, many sectors.
That's fantastic. Now, I think we could, without further ado, go into the Q&A session and see whether we have, you've seen what wonderful speakers we have, and you've seen what experts there are in the field. So this is your time to ask a question. I'll be coming, this is great, we have hands up, fantastic. I would just like to ask you to A, name your name, B, name your organization, C, keep the question short so many people can ask, and D, tell us who the question is for. So the gentleman who is holding his hand up, yes, please do the A, B, C, D.
Of course. First of all, I think before I have to thank the panel and yourself for a very good session. My name is Majdi Hashkali. I'm actually from ICIEC. It's Palestine Prosperity Investment and Development in Palestine. And the question actually is very much, we all know that PPP is not an easy relationship. It has never been easy between the public and the private sector. And in our case, for example, sometimes the public sector actually hinders the progress of the private sector, especially if they're actually involved in infighting, politics. In our case, it's actually occupation. So how ICIEC can actually facilitate, eliminate, assist in removing sort of such hurdles, especially when an institution like ourselves, we're investing around $100 million of private sector in building impact infrastructure projects in Palestine, which will save the government and will save the economy around billions and billions of dollars on the long term. And the projects that we're building actually infrastructure like energy, animal feed, renewable energy, housing, all sorts of things. So I would like to hear from the panel, especially from Mr. Tom Tilling, because he said they have experience in 60 countries, but I don't think Palestine is one of them. Thank you very much.
So Tom, take it away.
I'm sorry, there is a lot of echo when you're sitting here, so the question is a bit difficult to understand. But let me maybe repeat what I understood. Is your question related to to what protections you have or how you protected you feel as an investor?
Speak in the mic so we can hear. So we can hear. You know, the acoustics are very bad.
Palestine has no protection in that case, and the public sector has absolutely no influence in attracting more investments to come into Palestine. And we, as a public sector, we're trying to implement such a project which will make an influence and actually create an independent economy in Palestine. We can't. And my question was, you worked in 60 countries successfully. Palestine was not one of them. So what kind of advice would you give either to the public sector in Palestine or to the private sector in Palestine to start establishing that kind of relationship?
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Now it's very clear. So indeed, we did not do any investment in Palestine. And I can definitely see the challenges, right? And apart from the four key parameters that I mentioned earlier on, I think what's extremely important is exactly the support from multilaterals like ICIEC, multilateral insurance agencies like ICIEC, in order to provide protections to lenders and also to investors, right? Because particularly, I think for a country like Palestine, the investors would also look to what we call a political risk insurance, and that's a political risk insurance. I mean, with the typical the four legs, which is breach of contract by the government counterparty, expropriation, convertibility, currency convertibility and transfer, and the fourth is war or civil disturbances. So for me that's an extremely important one for Palestine to attract investors in PPP structures.
Can I just throw this over to Mr. Casey, Your Excellency, because clearly you're important here.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. The issue of Palestine is not an easy issue, and he mentioned it himself. It's the last country in the world that is still under occupation, and people should know the facts. Talking about doing business in Palestine, it is not easy to do business there. It's a country that, like I said, is under occupation. It's a country that is under severe economic stress from everywhere from the occupation. Even if you want to do business in Palestine, you are being stopped from doing business there. Yeah. As a multilateral institution, we operate at the level of the group through funds that we have, and we leverage these funds with other multilateral institutions like the World Bank and MIGA, and we work with them in that inside the occupied territories. And it was mentioned here by our colleagues from Aqua Power that the risks that are associated, be it a political risk insurance, some of the regions in Palestine, they are considered as active war, and they are not passive war areas. And wherever you have active war, this restricts or forbids us from doing business under our agreements with our reinsurers that are there. So that limits the capacity that is available for us to do this. That puts the more of the need for development on the private sector itself. You have to take more risks yourself. And that limits the development of the Palestinian territories or Palestine in general. But we are willing to talk to you, to explore new ways, to see how we can start, at what level we can discuss it. Please visit us in our offices, and we most definitely will discuss that with you.
Mashallah, that was a very positive answer. Thank you. I think that should be, are you happy with the answers? Okay, thank you. So I have this nice gentleman there who's holding up his hand. ABC, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Khalifa Sarr, Director of Cabinet of Minister of Economic Planning and Cooperation, Senegal. So my first question is for His Excellency.
Can you speak in the mic? Really make sure the mic is on.
Yeah,
it's better.
My first question is for His Excellency, Mr. Kaisi. So you mentioned that PPP should be extended to some sectors, such as healthcare sector. You know, for power sector, for example, it's pretty straightforward as the risk sharing. Private sector is used to taking the risk, but if you think about health sector, usually the risk stays with the government, especially the medical risk. So there are some critics that say that eventually it is just increasing the cost to the government to do PPP in those sectors. So it would be interesting to have your view on that. My second question is for His Excellency the Minister. How do you match the urgency that government has to do some critical projects for population and the time that PPP usually takes to be developed and operate? My last question is for the representative of the private sector.
You need the last question,
My
this one.
last question. So it's for the representative of the private sector. We see that the private sector has high expected return in Africa with IRR that can go up to 20%, which makes sometimes PPP and private project not very compelling because of the cost that we end up paying. How do you see the evolution of your IRR target in African region? Thank you.
Okay, so first question first.
Thank you. Mr. Khalifa Sarr, he failed to mention that he is a board member at ICIEC as well.
And I told him to limit his questions. Your Excellency, I apologize.
So, in respect of the healthcare sector, definitely the COVID-19 pandemic have exposed and showed some gaps and shortcomings in many industries, and the healthcare sector is to be highlighted there, okay? And everywhere you are going and talking to people today, everywhere you're going and talking to people today, the healthcare sector is taking center stage because it has been exposed after the COVID-19. And no more than ever, you know, even though, you talk about the profitability and the repayment and so on and so forth, ICIEC has had an extensive experience in the PPP sector for healthcare in Turkey. And they have been transformed into state-of-the-art. When you talk about the healthcare industry, they moved into state-of-the-art facilities that they are working now, not just at the level of Turkey, but regionally and globally. They will go into medical tourism after that. It's going to become a generating proposition for the government in Turkey, and not just to service, the local population there. And I take it the same thing for Senegal. Senegal, until today, it is still a hub for people visiting from sub-Saharan Africa to go there and to be treated at the hospitals in Senegal. So we do believe that PPP can be a very effective way of us attracting financing for the healthcare sector in Senegal and beyond.
It's very good. So the second question is, I think, to you, Your Excellency.
Yeah, yes, thank you for the interesting question, and it's very valid. Of course, preparation of PPP deal takes time. And if you face a task of building COVID-related hospital to treat people and provide emergency services for them, you probably wouldn't be choosing PPP model to finance this particular project. However, for less kind of emergency projects, I don't think PPP is much longer or even longer than regular government or public investment approach of financing this project. Yes, structuring, preparing project, producing high quality financial models, putting together legal agreements takes time. But at the same time, it ensures you that you are delivering a high quality project, because it goes through reviews and prepared under scrutiny of financial institutions, investors, government, different agencies involved. And at the end of the day, you have much better and higher quality cooked deal. Second, when you do it first time, of course, it takes longer. But replicating projects from our experience in the same sector, similar projects, it makes it much faster, because both institutions and people know what they're doing. And most important, markets understand what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, I don't think you can really save time by going to regular ways of financing against PPP, except, of course, emergency cases when you need to build or deliver really urgently. Thank you.
That was very good. And the third question. To whom did you address your third question? Okay.
I'm happy to take it. Thank you.
Mr. Tom.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with you. I mean, I'm often shocked when I see what type of tariffs in the power sector that you see in sub-Saharan Africa, including in Senegal also. These tariffs I think, are not affordable, right? And they are not sustainable in the long term. And these are the typical contracts that will be put into question by next government, by future governments, and so on. And I don't think they can survive. I also do think, and I see that the return expectations of investors like Aqua Power or other players in the same sector are going down very quickly with respect to sub-Saharan Africa. And you can see a number of good examples where tariffs have gone down dramatically. Yeah, if you look, for example, we won a tender in Ethiopia, 2 times 125 megawatt PV at very low tariffs. So and why? Because the contractual framework was very well done. It followed international bankable standards. The regulatory framework was acceptable, and there is a lot of support from DFIs, from multilaterals also. So I do think this is also a model that should work for the whole African continent, including sub-Saharan Africa.
Very good. So do we have other questions? Yes, the gentleman back there. We need to have some questions from this side of the room as well.
Hello.
Please identify yourself, your institution, short question, and to whom you want to ask the question.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Omar. I want to ask you some questions about
Can you
banks.
speak into the mic, please, because of the acoustics?
Okay. My name is Omar, and I want to ask you some questions about banks. Can we see the growth of ethical banks around the globe in the near future?
Who do you want to ask this question?
What did you say?
Who do you want to ask this question? Who should answer? Who of the three should answer your question?
I think fourth one. The one who said before. Yeah.
Tom.
Okay. No, thanks. I think it's a very good question. Because when you say ethical banks, obviously ethical is a very broad word, right? But banks, and particularly, when you look to the development finance institutions, but also when you look into, development finance institutions, including multilateral agencies like Islamic Development Bank, ICIEC, and so on. But also when you look at commercial banks, there is a lot of ethics and ethical requirements which are included in the whole process. So for every project that we do, for example, as Aqua Power, and which are financed by multilateral banks, by commercial banks, there is a thorough environmental and social impact assessment that needs to be done to see what is the impact on the people, how can we mitigate the impact on the people, how do we have to compensate the people that are impacted because of land or because of other issues, and the same with the environmental. If we do a wind project, there is a thorough study of 1 full year at least that need to be done in order to see what is the impact on birds, what is the impact on the flora, on the fauna. So there are a lot of ethical elements which are already imposed by multilateral and other private finance institutions.
Thank you.
That's very good. Does anybody else want to answer this question here? Okay, Mr. Lavazza.
Yeah, I think this question is very important from the point of view of the due diligence that is done by the financial institutions, and especially the development financial institutions. There is a very elaborate framework of safeguards, so which is undertaken, whether it is environment or it is social, some of the points which were elaborated by Tom. And also there is an anti-corruption due diligence which is done. So it is not purely lending for the sake of returns, but it is also taking care of the collateral effects of the lending, which is taken into account. And especially from the development perspective, the impact that lending would create on development, on social well-being, on environment, I think all these are taken into consideration.
And let us not forget that from an investor perspective, ESG, environment, social and governance compatible investment is the fastest growing asset class. They think that by 2025, 50% of all institutionally managed money in the United States is going into ESG investment, or it's not happening. So this is really, really important from an ethical perspective, but also from a perspective of attracting money. But I would also like to hear what His Excellency Mr. Kaisi has to say to this.
Like it was mentioned, ethical finance is a very broad word. The answer is Islamic finance. This is how it is. And then we saw the growth of ethical finance that came after Islamic finance, and this is because at the backdrop of the success that Islamic finance has found, they needed to have something that is not backed by Sharia laws and regulations. It has developed to the fact that now it is widely used as ethical financing, and some people might use it interchangeably as Islamic finance, but it's not, because it's not Sharia based. The contracts are different. It is based, like it was mentioned by our colleagues here, on the social aspect of what it is to the society as a whole. It has expanded now, where everybody is going after the SEG, like you said, social, environmental, and governance, to encompass everything that we are doing, because the community at large for the business on the private sector is engaging these issues. And we see them now, they are adopting it in their processes, procedures, and internal policies as we are going forward in that.
It's very true, and you have some of the biggest investment firms managing about 4-point-something trillion dollars, giving notice to 68 the global big banks and saying either you're ESG, especially on the E part, or we're not going to do business with you. You're not going to see our money. So now I would like to see somebody from this side. Oh yes, the gentleman there.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Artur. I'm from Commercial Bank of Kyrgyzstan. My question is to Mr. Vafayev. In previous plenary session, we were informed that there is nothing in legislation of Uzbekistan regarding Islamic finance and Islamic insurance. My question is, was it easy or hard to start cooperation with ICIEC? Can you share with us the experience of Uzbekistan of cooperation with the ICIEC? Thank you.
Thank you. We relatively late comers as members of the ICIEC. I think we joined in 2019. And but despite the fact that we joined ITFC and ICIEC in 2019, I think our total volume of operation exceeds now 500 million US dollars, and this is private sector operations. So it seems that even without formal legislation related to Sharia compliant financing, we still can successfully work, and we will definitely continue this trend from now on. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Yes, the gentleman back there. Why is nobody here asking questions? The gentleman back here.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Aziz. I am from ICIEC. I have a question addressed to Mr. Kaisi. What is the average cost of insuring in emerging markets, and what is the difference? Do you have any privileged cost of insurance for developing nations? And what is the difference between the cost of insuring for developed nations and developing nations, like so-called poor nations?
There is a private sector man speaking. He's interested in the money.
Well, Brother Aziz, I wish I have an answer for you. Risk management is different from region to region. Risk management is different from sector to sector. Risk management is different from an entity to another. You might have yourself an entity in a developed economy that is rated very poorly, and similarly you can have an entity in a developed economy that is highly rated. Similarly to governments, either they are rated or not rated, and so on and so forth. But the cost of doing business, definitely because of the risks, be it real or perceived as high in some countries, they are trickling down from the government into the private sector that is there. In order to do business in general, you have to have access to data, access to information, where you are taking the right decision when you are assessing risk, be it on the business side or on the insurance side. In the absence of real data and data that can be qualified and quantified, it becomes very hard in order for you to pinpoint the risk, and this is why you see rates that are increasing. This is associated definitely with the rating of the institution itself, if it's rated, the government itself, and the overall environment of doing business over there. So there is nothing to say that this is the average rate. But the rule of thumb, definitely, to underwrite a business in Canada is definitely than to underwrite a business today in Afghanistan. So I know the disparity here, but as institutions that we deal on risk on day-to-day basis, and especially as a multilateral institution, it is important here to mention people work with ICIEC, especially when we have international financial institutions to work with us on PPP projects. Specifically here we are talking. They come to ICIEC so we can lend our rating, that is the AA3, to the country where they are effecting these projects in order for the government to get the longer tenor for the repayment and to enjoy the lower rates to make the deal feasible. This is how we operate and that's how we work, but risk management at the basis of everything we do, and definitely there's big diversity in working in developed country or in countries that are underdeveloped or least developed countries that are there.
In order to maintain your investment grade rating, what are your RACs, your risk acceptance criteria?
Well, again, I tell you, Ms. Meyer, we have limits that are set subject to the risk categorization that we have.
Okay.
All right? Everybody knows that majority of our member countries, they are least developed. And like you said, it is not easy in order for you to maintain the rating while you are engaging actively these member countries, be it on the commercial side or on the sovereign side that are there. The reason we are where we are here leveraging our capital with highly rated reinsurance partners. Our rating is helping us as well, the mother entity. We have the largest as well shareholders within the institution. And finally, we have to talk as well about the governance structure that we have internally that protects us and ring-fence us from going into the unknown.
Yeah, no, that's very important. Oh, I get questions from this side. This is fantastic. Gentleman here.
I'm Ajmer from Amana Bank, Sri Lanka. My question is to His Excellency Kaisi. Amana Bank has certain projects related to PPP, and my question is, although Amana Bank is not a member country, IDB has certain investments, successful investments going on for some times. And should there be any PPP projects, would ICIEC be in a position to consider insuring them despite we being a non-member country?
Sorry, what country is it in?
Non-member.
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. We had that question this morning with our colleagues from Yıldızlar. We were talking about connecting, PPP projects into non-member countries. While there are restrictions under the mandate of ICIEC, where we have to do investment within the member countries or into the member countries, but there are specific solutions that we use, different structures that will provide the cover, but will not be enjoying the long tenor that you might enjoy under a regular structure that we are using. We use export policies cover that because we are exporting either services or commodities. So here we take it as an export of services, but the tenor cannot be extended up to 15 to 18 to 20 years. It will be restricted from 5 to 7 years tenor that are there. So we're capable, but you will not enjoy the same benefits as a member country in that respect.
That's interesting. Do you need Islamic structures to be able to insure?
No, we are working on conventional structures and on the Islamic structured financing that is there. And this is something that is highly acceptable by the Sharia board, because when we are dealing with non-compliant transactions, we are always excluding the interest part of the transaction.
That's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going. So we have a question. I think, gentlemen, that's you. You have a question. Yes, could you please identify yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
Шухрат Сматлоев, первый заместитель председателя Орион банка. Я представляю Таджикистан. Во-первых,
in the first place, I'd like to congratulate the Uzbek people on today's holiday, and I have two questions to ask you. So it's not questions precisely. I would like to learn in greater detail the following thing. The first thing, that in Tajikistan we have the first Islamic bank that is operating in our country. Do you think that the Islamic product, that is providing the product, this is not developed, so we haven't yet developed ourselves, that the people haven't yet reached the threshold where they could accept this thing. Well, many people in Afghanistan, many people think that the products that come from Islamic Bank, these are very cheap, and sometimes they think that these come free. This is number one. The second thing, concerning insurance and about the interest, what do you think, compared with other international organizations, especially in the post-COVID period? Would it be possible to consider these projects? Because we know that compared with other international organizations, currently the interest will be high. And what can we do in this respect? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kaisi or with Mr. Shokri, who would like to answer? You, Mr. Kaisi, I guess.
I'll try to answer as much as I heard. There was a big echo and interruption in the translation. I'll start from the second part about the insurance. If I understood you correctly, you were talking about interest that is on projects to be financed? Or what part of the insurance on the interest you are talking about? What was the specific question?
Yeah,
I spoke about the project, and like I said, we already have Islamic Bank in our country, and it gives us, renders us its services. So so when we discussed credits and other products, insurance in particular, if there are some instruments currently, well, I'd like, when we turn to Islamic Bank, and what is the difference between applying to or conventional banks and Islamic banks? What is the difference between these two applications, so to speak?
I do not believe that the translation is
Well, I think what he
there.
wanted to ask is where you're different in working with Islamic banks or normal or other banks.
Well, definitely you asked me, I advocate Islamic finance and Islamic banking there. Whenever there's an option between Islamic banking or conventional banking, I would choose Islamic banking. But the question remains, talking about the interest part. In Islamic banks, there are no interest. Interest is forbidden under Sharia. So it is not there, it does not exist. When you go to Islamic banks, there is the premise of murabaha, okay, which is the profit that you can get on your investments or on your deposits that are there. And it can be on musharaka basis or on mudaraba basis, subject to the agreement that you go under with these banks as an institution that you are borrowing from them, or as an individual that you are depositing your money over there. I do not know if I have answered the question.
I think that was. Would you have something to add to this?
Just quickly, just to add that the Islamic financing is asset-backed. So all transactions in Islamic finance has to be backed by specific assets that's being sold or rented. And also the ambiguity in Islamic finance is much less, in a way that all the issues related to commitment fee, cancellation fee, a lot of different components that will be building up additional costs in the future is not in the Islamic finance, because it's a buy-sell transaction which will be paid over many years. We always try to explain this in our Islamic finance trainings and workshops that we do it in our member countries to explain this and to explain it's not a free financing. Thank you.
That's a very good point. Thank you. The commitment fees and all these fees. So I think I can only take one more question. And as we haven't had a lady ask a question yet, may I ask the lady to ask the question?
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon for our... okay. Is it hearable now? Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, all honorable speakers and participants of the event. My name is Iroda and I am from Uzbekistan. My question is for His Excellence Deputy Minister of Republic of Uzbekistan and His Excellence Mr. Kaisi. Actually, in our country, it was announced by the government. Actually, it was said by our president that in order to start Islamic finance in our country, it will be highly collaborated with the Islamic Development Bank. And my question is the following. Are there any steps for collaboration, especially on establishing Islamic banks and guiding them during the processes, right processes and under Sharia-based processes, will be guided by especially ICIEC? And if yes, could you please somehow provide us with details what steps will be done by this institute? Thanks.
Okay, I think Your Excellency, First Excellency, then Second Excellency.
Thank you for this question. This is the life of officials these days because our president raised this issue and informed that we are planning to collaborate with the Islamic Development Bank and on introduction of Islamic financing tools and Sharia compliant tools here about 10 days ago, and our young people already requesting and making us accountable. Definitely, if seriously, we definitely will be working with Islamic Development Bank and with other institutions which provide technical assistance. For example, we have good relations with Islamic banks of Abu Dhabi, Islamic Bank of Dubai, who are ready to help us with regulations, with recommendations regarding the law, if necessary, and all other aspects, because there are some regulatory aspects, how banks should be regulated, what kind of prudential ratios should be applied to them, and many, many other technical issues. So we will engage with all these partners, including the Islamic Development Bank group. We'll request and hopefully receive special technical assistance and advisory service from these institutions, and work together to prepare a draft of all necessary legal and regulatory acts. So this is a plan.
Your Excellency.
Thank you, Sister Irada. Irada is will in Arabic. This is an Arabic word called will. As long as there is a will from the government of Uzbekistan to establish Islamic finance, it will happen, and it is. The decision was taken to establish Islamic finance within the Uzbekistan. To answer your questions, the whole group, one of its main mandate is the promotion of Islamic finance. So yes, we are capable to do it, and we are the leaders globally in promoting Islamic finance. We do it in all the member countries where we are, and we are the leader in that aspect. And I'm sure His Excellency the President of ISDB, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasir, during his meetings with His Excellency the President and the governors and the officials in Uzbekistan, they will be addressing this issue. And we are fully committed in order for us to support the establishment and the success of Islamic finance in Uzbekistan and from here into the remainder of the CIS region. At the level of insurance, we have a very close relationship with the Uzbek Invest. Thank you. With Uzbek Invest, we have a very good relationship, and we have discussed as well with them how we can help and how we can support to set up their insurance compliant section in trade credit and PRI. And this is something that we have already started engaging with them in order to see how we can proceed with this. So we are fully committed. Okay, we see that this market that has majority Muslims, that there is a huge demand, and then this is an answer to whatever is needed in order for us to proceed with that. Thank you.
So in other words, where the government has the will, the IDB will find the way.
Inshallah, thank you so much.
But sorry, we have to stop here. I'm sorry, we have to.
One sentence, please. Actually, we are young cadres of Uzbekistan are really willing to collaborate our own share to the establishment and development of Islamic finance in Uzbekistan. And we will try to do our best to assist in this way. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So allow me to just quickly summarize the four or five key points that I've heard, because we're sort of just about at the end of where we are in terms of time management. It's all about, if you look at ICIEC and what ICIEC does, what the multilateral insurers do, it's about cost and tenor. It's lowering the cost, extending the tenor. Regulatory frameworks and institutions are key. It's capacity building. And as Mr. Telling said, the long-term view is important because ministers change, things change, so you need to establish those long-term relationships. And that's precisely where an institution like the IDB comes in, because they have those long-term relationships in the member countries. So there is many want to extend to more sectors, and especially the IDB has worked on the healthcare sector, which the pandemic has shown us how much we need to do. PPPs are really important in this region as well, because we have aging infrastructure which needs to be renewed, and in order to get the tenor that it takes for long infrastructure investments, even on a PPP basis, again, these multilateral insurers, especially IDB, are important. We had a very heartfelt message from Palestine, where if they don't get your help, that's really difficult. Then we have the ethics question, where His Excellency Mr. Kaisi said, well, look at Islamic finance, because it's really based on that ethical basis, and the social aspect is very important. And just to round it up, although Uzbekistan only joined ICIEC in 2019, business volume is already up at 500 million. So that's a very, very fast growth. So without further ado, please do give your hand for the excellent panelists. Thank you. Thank you very much. You were brilliant. Thank you. I think we need to stay. We're getting a photo, family photo.